Well, Web Summit, do not look away because we are all about to look into the future. It may not seem like it right now, but we have got three fortune tellers here on the stage. They are VCs whose job it is to look into the future and see what opportunities are out there and how they can take advantage of them. So what we're going to do today is talk about some of the really hot ideas in tech and try to cut through a lot of the buzz, try to look at the real opportunities out there. And so one of the first areas that I really want to look at right now is on-demand. It seems like every day there's another pitch for a startup, promising on-demand this, on-demand that. Ryan, I know that your firm has invested in a number of on-demand startups, including Lux, the on-demand parking service out in San Francisco. Could you kind of tell us, what industries tend to support on-demand well and which just don't?
Yeah, we're still very excited about on-demand. I think there's been some kind of well-known challenges in this space, but we think overall it's still really exciting. I think not specific about the industry, because I think we look more for the characteristics in it. You look for something obviously with a huge market, a lot of frequency of use, so something people are using a lot because you want to try and build habit, and then companies that have operational excellence and some kind of technology leverage that builds a differentiated model than just trying to deploy a bunch of people, because people be the most complex and expensive part of it, so you need to make sure technology is helping you get it more efficient.
Right, and I mean, you two are VCs as well, and the question that I think a lot of entrepreneurs probably have is, when someone is pitching you an on-demand startup, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Is it a worry? Is it a cringe? Is it a promise of something great?
Low margins. It's not really an area that I focus on, but I'm a huge consumer of it, which also worries me when I get these great deals. But I do think they're going to be winners in the sector. I think there's just too much critical mass with some of the companies. So,
Dave, what about you?
Probably very simple stuff. I think about frequency of use, what's the transaction size of an average purchase, what's the natural margins that can be taken advantage of there. I think there's a lot of people who will classify on-demand kind of in one big category, but probably matters a lot whether that's a daily use app or a weekly use app versus something that's a lot more infrequent.
Right, and Dave, I know that you have a lot of experience sort of working outside the United States, and I'm sure that there are a lot of people in this audience who are interested in Europe, potentially Asia and other areas. Is there a difference in how on-demand works, outside the U.S.? Is there something that entrepreneurs should keep in mind?
Yeah, and probably just because smartphone penetration might be a little bit less broad on other parts of the world. That said, probably in the next 3 to 5 years, a lot of those problems go away, but you might still have differences in level of bandwidth or ability to support certain services. You're probably going to have different payment ability and perhaps different logistics ability. But there's very big countries that I think most people aren't really thinking about. I think a lot of people have now accepted that India and China are going to be huge mobile audiences, but places that you wouldn't normally think of, Nigeria, Pakistan, Iran, a lot of very big young markets that are very social media enabled in the Middle East and Africa and in Southeast Asia.
Right. Well, Dave mentioned penetration, and Ryan, I want to come back to you and talk about, how far will on-demand go? Are we going to live in a world where everything is on-demand, from, say, the air we breathe, to the water we drink, to the cars that we drive? Is there a limit?
Yeah, I think, back to a little bit of the frequency thing, if you're going to be one of the major companies, you got to be thinking about something that's happening on a daily basis for people to build habit. But I think as, Uber and these other guys build infrastructure across a city that is helping stuff get from A to B, once that's there, you think of it like AWS, and then other businesses can be built on top of it. I think infrequent use cases trying to deploy their own type of infrastructure like that is going to fail early on. But I think once that infrastructure is laid out, you'll see more and more use cases built on top of it.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. I want to talk about payment too, because payment touches so many areas of tech, and we've seen billion-dollar valuations of a number of payment companies in the past few years. And Jalik, I know that you were involved with M-Pesa, which was the Kenyan company that played a huge role in sort of innovating within the payment space. What did you learn from that?
Yeah, so I have just been following M-Pesa for a while and because of my interest in cross-border payments. And I first came across it in 2008. It launched in 2007. And for those of you who don't know, it's run by or created by Safaricom and Vodafone to allow digital payments with mobile phones in Kenya. And right now, over 50% of Kenya's GDP goes through that platform. And And it's really shown how a lot of countries that we don't think of can leapfrog in innovation. I mean, they don't even have smartphones there, but they're using these mobile phones for transactional purposes, and has allowed the GDP to grow a great deal as a result. So a takeaway from that is that there is a way to use digital representation of money. That's really just a way of moving assets around, and there has to be some cash out with the agents kind of at the last mile, but and that's really what spurred my interest in the blockchain and Bitcoin, because I think we can take just that usage example and extrapolate it to, why can't this work for the rest of the world? Why do, when I travel here, have to go through all these fees to either transfer money or to take money out of the ATM, and I'm hit by all these fees. If I had a Bitcoin wallet, or a mobile money wallet that can work across borders at much lower fees, I can, be able to hold on to a lot more of that capital.
I think that would be great. I mean, why hasn't Bitcoin taken off yet? What's holding it back?
Well, I think part of it is, the press. No, I mean, that's a very simplistic way of looking at it. But certainly there were a lot of scandals early on with Silk Road and nefarious activity, which in my view, that's never going to go away when you're dealing with money. And there weren't enough real use cases being put out there. And the conversation's been very much about the technology. I mean, if you look at the internet evolving, right? We weren't talking about all the nitty-gritty of the technology. We were just looking at the usage and the applications, and I think that's the chasm that we have to cross in the Bitcoin sector. I've invested in several companies that are using Bitcoin as the rails, but nobody even knows that Bitcoin is behind it. It's just a more pleasant, delightful user experience for them.
I also want to make sure that we have time to think a little bit about wearables. I know that is such a hot segment right now. We're here at Web Summit. I'm sure this is the highest per capita concentration of Apple Watch, Fitbit wearers, perhaps anywhere in the world. But I want to know, in 5 years' time, where will wearables be and who will be wearing them? Ryan or Dave, did you have thoughts on that?
I think wearables are great. I really like wearing T-shirts, and that goes over quite well. I mean, I think there's clearly a use case for Fitbit and sports enthusiasts. I'm a little less confident or much of a believer about the Apple Watch or other areas. I think that in a lot of cases is a use case looking for nerds to actually provide a market there, and I'm not sure that the 1 to 2% of the universe who feels like the Apple Watch and this, kind of UX area is cool. I'm still maybe not quite a believer there. I think I am kind of more believing that you're going to have surfaces that can do display technology, and probably as we get further into AR and VR use, there's lots of things that don't actually display we can project information onto, and that will be interesting.
Ryan, what about the pitch? Let's say an entrepreneur comes to you pitching some great wearable idea. It's going to take over the market. It's going to disrupt everything. What is your first question?
And we look a lot for what's the software behind it that's differentiating the hardware. And if you're just building commoditized hardware, it's going to be really hard to compete. A few guys have kind of gotten that trajectory, but it's really hard generally. So we look at how do you capture unique and interesting data, and what's the software you can build into that to provide new insights. I think generally we've been pretty unexcited by the lack of good sensors. And so it feels like people are remixing the same 2 or 3 sensors over and over again in a pretty uninteresting way. And I think hopefully over the next 5 years, we'll see a lot more development, interesting sensors that give people unique insights through wearables. But
that makes sense. So today we've been talking a lot about the future and where, a number of hot technologies could be in the future. But in order to get to the future, we need a healthy foundation. We sort of need to know, is Silicon Valley in a healthy place? And so I want to use your brains and your expertise to sort of give us a diagnosis of Silicon Valley. And, I kind of want maybe 30 seconds to a minute, each of you sort of, putting on that doctor's stethoscope, holding it up to Silicon Valley and telling us how healthy it is. Jolek, maybe we could start with you. How healthy is Silicon Valley?
I think it's unhealthy right now.
Okay. Why?
Well, I'm also based in New York, so I have, some distance from the valley.
Distance can be good.
Yeah, and I can say I do think valuations at all at all stages are ahead of themselves. I've invested through 2 downturns. I've been a VC since 1999. So, and I was out in the Valley in '99, and so I worry about valuations getting ahead of themselves because then there's nowhere to go, and then you start to see a lack of exits, which we're starting to see, and then that just slows down, all of the capital going in.
Right.
into
Dave,
the
30
sector.
seconds. How healthy are we?
I think that people are probably a little oversold on the Valley falling apart next week. I think that relative to maybe 5 to 10 years ago, actually, there's a hell of a lot of companies producing things of value, generating revenue, even occasionally being profitable in the Valley.
What's that?
Really?
But if you look around the world, there's definitely places where valuations are even more out of hand sometimes. I think the
Where are some of
Chinese
those
market.
places? Yeah, China.
Yeah, I think if you look at the Chinese market, things were really crazy. I think the public markets have, come back to a little bit of reality. I'm not sure about the startup market. Southeast Asia, maybe a little bit expensive. There's other places around the world that are really great value to invest in Latin America and Middle East. So I think that, Silicon Valley might be a little overpriced. There are probably going to be some people who lose money, but I actually am more worried about. I'm not worried. I think public market valuations are probably further oversold than, say, unicorns with liquidation preferences. I doubt that's going to be the collapse of society in tech.
Right. Ryan, how healthy?
Yeah, I think Dave talks about a good point. The public markets have stayed generally pretty rational, which then keeps a cap on everything that's happening in private markets. So I worry about it less from that side. I think it's great because there's great access to capital, which allows anyone with a great idea to try and show up, get money to get started, then they have to prove themselves. And once they're working, and the ones that really work are building foundational and really interesting companies. So overall, I think it's generally healthy. I think the prices will correct back in a market. And I feel like the major trends around the public markets have been pretty good.
Great. Well, we've been talking a lot about sort of the long-term future, some big ideas, where things could be in 5, 10 years. But I want to think ahead to, say, 2016, next year. We're nearing the end of the year. Jalik, maybe we could go to you and talk about, where's your money going in 2016? What are the exciting ideas that you see really kind of sprouting up that we haven't heard of yet?
Well, I don't know whether it's stuff that we haven't heard about, but I'm going to continue investing in the blockchain, and as we see the infrastructure get more robust, I think we're going to be able to see a lot of different asset classes being able to be built and transacted on the core infrastructure and platform. So that's an area I'm going to continue to look at. What I'm actually thinking about a lot is this post-smartphone world. So, we're talking a lot about smartphones, and a lot of the world is still getting onto smartphones, but it goes into the wearable conversation and the Internet of Things, and I actually think the blockchain is going to power a lot of that. So technology really being invisible instead of us seeking it out, we're going to be able to benefit from it.
Right. Ryan, where's your money going in 2016?
2016, it's not stuff people haven't heard of because I think it's such a short time frame, but we're really excited about just kind of healthcare and the changes that are happening there. And I think some major companies are going to get built. We're spending a lot of time looking at kind of connected hardware as a vehicle for deploying software. You have new sensors out in the world. What do you start to do with all of that information and make new insights about it? And so those are categories that we're thinking about a lot. We spent a lot of time with Andy Rubin and his group on the connected hardware side, which has been fun and exciting. So.
Dave, I want to hear you. Next year, what's the hot new thing?
We're going to probably focus on stuff that's relatively near term, but we think is overlooked. I think financial services, both in the consumer and small business area, are really interesting, particularly combining social platforms with lending. I think you're going to see a lot of disruption in the lending space with better information from social networks informing credit scores and whether people are able to borrow money. One that's kind of really basic that we look at is use of visual systems in combination with commerce. So pictures, video, and eventually AR and VR combined with commerce. Really kind of basic for both pictures and video, and I think there'll be a natural progression into more advanced technologies once they're available.
Right. I want to look back quickly, too, and sort of think about this past year. What has been sort of the most overhyped investment or area? The things that you just saw, full of buzz, full of fluff, that really should not have gotten the attention that they should have. Ryan, thoughts?
I think on demand, in the same way that we talked about the opportunity there, it's also kind of overhyped, and people are sometimes throwing money into companies that the foundational elements of it aren't very strong. And so I think it's one that we've seen Uber take off and become incredibly valuable, and then everyone thinks that therefore everything else in the on-demand space will be. I still think there's great opportunities there, but I also think it's been overhyped and overinvested.
Jalik, you.
I agree with that. I would. Yeah, I was going to say on demand,
Yeah.
and I'd say within that, the food tech sector too. I've seen so much activity in that sector.
Boxes with meals
Right,
delivered right to your door.
And then 20 different delivery services with like little nuance differentiations, and so.
And there's Amazon, if you're there, that Amazon has sort of started testing out food delivery. Do you
Yeah.
think that could sort of, obliterate some of the big propositions of these small
Well,
food
I think
companies?
people always worry about Amazon, but I think there's still room for entrance
Right.
because they've certainly tried a lot of things and shut down businesses. So I don't think that they necessarily have a golden touch on everything. But I just feel like the food delivery space. I have very little loyalty when I'm using them, and I think that's worrisome for the industry, for the sector.
Dave, worst investment of the past year?
Well, I've been doing a lot of research, and I think pornography is clearly overhyped. But I'm here to make sure that we take care of all that for you guys.
Continue the research.
Actually, I'd say, although it holds a lot of promise, IoT and hardware in general, I think, is really sexy for a lot of people. It's attracting a lot of capital. I think most entrepreneurs who haven't been in that area for more than 5 years are probably learning a lot of hard lessons about the manufacturing cycle, design cycle, and the capital requirements for building hardware and physical-based businesses. So as much as it holds a lot of promise, there's a lot of dead bodies in IoT, and I expect more of that to happen.
Great. So really quickly, we've got about a minute left. I want everyone to pretend like there's a huge crystal ball right here in the middle of us. You guys are the fortune tellers. I want you guys to sort of tell the audience, your job is to look into the future and to think about huge trends and what's going to be happening. Not everyone is a VC. Not everyone has a sort of vision and ability to kind of predict what's coming. What's one tip you would give someone who's really trying to spot the next thing? Ryan, maybe we can start with you and work back. We've got about a minute.
So from an investment point of view, or from a founder trying to build something, or
Let's do founder.
founder? Founding anything in any environment is incredibly hard. I think you want to try and figure out what are the most trends and the trends that are changing the most. They're kind of the wind at your back.
Right.
They're going to help provide some push, because things are going to be incredibly difficult in building any company, and you want to make sure that there's some momentum behind you just through an industry or some transactional change. So whether it's mobile or fintech or whatever, you got to figure out what's helping propel you beyond just your own idea and the concept.
Dave, what's the way to see the future? What's the way to use this ball?
This sounds kind of old school, but I think there's a lot of businesses on YouTube and other video platforms that just haven't been looked at. I think Instagram and Pinterest are probably close followers as well. They're just really, really huge distribution channels, and most people don't think of them as kind of engines for entrepreneurship, but they generate a huge amount of capital.
Right, Jalik, teach us how to be a fortune teller.
Travel. And
a good
it's also
answer.
fun. We talked about M-Pesa, and I first came across that 7, 8 years ago, and it's really a lot of that has formed the thesis of the fund that I started last year. So
Sounds like travel's it. We've got to
Yeah.
end. Web Summit, thank you so much. Dave, Ryan, and Jalik, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.